Welcome to part 3 on the big picture. A huge chunk of the Bible is dedicated to the Judges in the book of Judges and Kings and Chronicles. And so, and it starts in 1 Samuel. So you've got Judges, then you've got 1 and 2 Samuel, 1 and 2 Kings, and 1 and 2 Chronicles. So you've got these 7 books that deal with kind of the leadership of Israel. How does that fit into the big picture? It's huge chunk of the Bible, and it gets a little bit tedious. One of my boys recently, I had given my kids the Kingstone Bible. It's a graphic novel Bible, but it's 3 large volumes. And one of them was recently reading it, and they came to me and they're like, the Kings are so boring. It's the same story over and over and over again. This king served God. This king didn't serve God, so God destroyed him. This king served God. This king didn't serve God. God destroyed him. He's like, why is it so repetitive? Well, a couple of things to note, right, is that the people have come out of slavery in Egypt. We saw that last time. And they have come now into the promised land, and they have disobeyed God. They were supposed to destroy the 7 nations in Canaan and get rid of them all. And because they didn't, because they left some of them there, these nations have now become, the Bible calls them thorns in their eyes. And essentially these other nations, these idolatrous nations, are leading the people of God astray. And so God will discipline them by submitting them into the authority of the Philistines or the Moabites or the Ammonites. And then what will happen is God will raise up a judge to deliver them. And that will happen for 350 years, a period of them being in slavery to another nation and a period of them being rescued by God because he's faithful to his promises, to his covenants that he made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so that period of judges lasts 350 years. The period of kings will be even longer than that. And the period of judges only comes to an end because the people of God, the Israelites, say, they come to Samuel in 1 Samuel 8 and they say, give us a king so that we can be like all the other nations. Now, you might not remember this from last week, or maybe you didn't watch last week's video, but the reason that God did what he did in Exodus through Deuteronomy was so that his people would not be like the other nations, so that he would specifically bring them out and make them separate, set them apart as holy. God wanted his people to look different than the rest of the nations. And by 1 Samuel 8, now the people are going, we want to look just like all the other nations. Give us a king. And Samuel's mad about this. And God says to Samuel, don't be mad. They haven't rejected you. They have rejected me from being king over them. So God's perspective is that from Exodus 12, when he brings them out of Egypt, until 1 Samuel 8, he has been their king. And they kept rejecting their king. They kept rejecting God, the one who had met with them on Mount Sinai, the one who had brought them through the Red Sea, the one who had fed them for 40 years in the wilderness, the one who brought them in to the promised land, to Canaan, and handed it over to them in 6 years' time. And now they've rejected his authority and they've rejected his leadership over and over and over and over again. And then we see the kings split the nation of Israel into the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. And the northern kingdom of Israel will never again have a king that honors God. And the southern kingdom of Judah goes back and forth. Depends on the day. Flip a coin, roll the dice. Some kings loved the Lord, some didn't, some were somewhere in between. Hey, we'll serve you a little bit, but we're also going to serve these idols. So what does all of this show us? What does it tell us about God? What does it have to do with the big picture? So first of all, we can see that the Bible tells us that Christ has received a kingdom for himself. Not yet, but will at the end of the age receive a kingdom for himself. There's a prophecy for us in the book of Daniel, which we'll come back to when we cover the prophets. But there's this prophecy that the Son of Man, Jesus, will come up to the Ancient of Days and receive a kingdom for himself. Meanwhile, all these other kingdoms were being built on the earth, and the Israelites are like, God, we're done being different than the rest of the world. We're done following you, and we want to follow our own path. Which is so stupid because it's not their own path. Really what they want to do is they want to be like everybody else. Give us a king so that we can serve him, so that we can honor him, and they've rejected God. So what does this tell us? What does the period of kings and the judges tell us, which is hundreds of years, right? So you're looking at like 1,000 years of Jewish history, give or take. 1,000 years of Jewish history of God raising up leaders, the people rejecting that leader, God raising up another leader, the people rejecting that leader over and over and over again through the prophets and then through the judges and then the kings. What's the point of all this? In part, the point of this is to show that God is consistent. Over this 1,000-year period, God remains faithful to his promise. Not just the promise he made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but now also the promise that he made to David. See, he told David, you will never lack a man to sit on my throne. As long as you serve me, as long as you glorify me, you'll never lack a man to sit on your throne. And Jesus will come from the line of David because Jesus is the ultimate king. And so the people have rejected God as king. They have heaped up for themselves their own king. And this is the world that we live in now, that people have rejected God as king and they have established their own king and they serve their own king. They serve their own desires. There's a couple of places you'll notice in the book of Judges where it says at this point there was no king in Israel, so the people did whatever was right in their own mind. And even when the king showed up and the people saw a king serving the Lord, if the king served the Lord, they'd kind of serve the Lord. If the king rejected the Lord, they'd go with him. But we have this theme that goes throughout. The people just did what was right in their own mind. It didn't matter what king they appointed. It didn't matter what judge was before them. And so this period of judges and kings it kind of shows the heart of people. The people who had been set apart to be the people of God, to be unique, to serve King God. And now they're like, you know what? We just want to do what we want to do. And yet, throughout the whole thing, God keeps people who are faithful to him. From the time they come into the promised land and they take over most of the promised land, not kicking out all the bad guys, for that 1,000 years of judges and kings, there's a faithful thread of people that are faithful to God, that continue to serve him, that continue to be a voice for him, that continue to lead the people in the right way, that continue to uphold the things of God. And that has never ceased to be the case. Like you go all the way back, to guys like Noah in Genesis 6, who stood up and were a voice. The Bible calls him in Hebrews 11 a preacher of righteousness. And so Noah is this guy that is standing before the people and he is proclaiming the truth of God. And then after Noah, you've got Abram, right? And then you've got Isaac, and then you've got Jacob, and you've got these people, Joseph, who are continuing to proclaim who God is and what he's done. And then it's Moses, and then for a little while, Aaron, and then after Moses, it's Joshua, and after Joshua, and it goes forward, and there's all these people. It's Samuel next. So what we see, how does this fit in? What we see is that the heart of people is to reject God as king, to serve their own desires. And yet we see that God is faithful. He never withdraws from his promise. And God always keeps someone alive. There is always a flame of truth that he continues through all these rebellious people so that people will know rightly who God is. And that's going to carry us all the way to the story of Jesus. And even now in 2023, that as people continue to reject God and say, look, we'll do whatever is right in our own eyes, God's faithfulness has not been jeopardized. And God has still raised up people who will proclaim the truth of God and point people to Jesus. And so there's a lot more to unpack, which we will do in the church series. But this should be enough for at least you guys to have a discussion. Join us next week for part 4.